As David mentioned earlier, this is kind of a topic of mutual interest to the VEGA community and the farmer-to-farmer community. So we've opened this up, and we have participants from the farmer-to-farmer community, which isn't always the case at the VEGA program meetings. I'm really grateful today to have representatives from 4 organizations to share their experiences in volunteer recruitment. And so from Global Communities, we have Elizabeth Adams, and so we've heard a little bit about your programs, but hopefully you'll be able to tell us a little bit more. Partners of the Americas, we have Andy Thomas. From TechnoServe, we have Megan Moyerman. And from Catholic Relief Services, we have Maria Figueroa. We're going to start out, maybe we'll just start on the left and work our way to the right, giving each panelist kind of 5 minutes to tell us a little bit about your volunteer programs and your approach to recruitment, the tips that you might have, and then I'm going to open it up to the room and the conference call for some questions and answers. Hopefully everyone has some topics that they'd like to discuss. So Maria, if you wouldn't mind starting out.
Sure. So I recruit solely for CRS's farmer-to-farmer program in East Africa, 4 countries. I recruit for all 4 of them. So we don't have any sort of very formal best practices, but we just have some general guidelines that we try to follow while recruiting. And one of them is, of course, our background checks that we do, checking with other implementers to make sure that volunteers have been well received before, if they've gone out to the field before. And of course, terrorist watch list check. Also, trusting our field staff. Sometimes when my field staff say no, I don't understand, necessarily why they're not receptive to a certain candidate, but I trust that they're the end user and have to field a volunteer in the field. So I always let my field staff have the last say for volunteer placement. I also try to play nice with my co-implementers. If I hear that somebody's considering a project in the Dominican Republic, I let them finish that up first and say, well, okay, you take a week or 2, see if you can make that happen, and if not, come back to me. Also, I kind of take the approach that, an agronomist can inform themselves on the soil conditions and the climate in East Africa, but they're not going to learn as easily to play nice. And so some of our biggest volunteer issues don't come from volunteers that don't have the right skill set. They come from volunteers that don't have the right people skills. And that's harder to learn, frankly. So I think I screen for nice more than and then I don't think this is the best practice, but this is just a tactic for me. We have very high targets. We put out a lot of volunteers. I try to engage 1 volunteer at a time on a scope of work, just to keep things simple. So those are some of our best practices. As far as strategies, I use, besides our database, of course, I use LinkedIn a lot. I set up a profile that describes very concretely how to apply for the program. I have a link to a video in there. And then I'll go on there and I'll type in skill sets. So if I'm looking for something very particular, I'll type it in the top, and then I'll narrow it by the United States, and I'll start linking with people. And then a couple days later, I'll look and see who's accepted my link, and I'll reach out and I'll send them an email, explain the program, and ask if they're interested. If they're not, I don't contact them again, and sometimes they are, and we can go from there. And you're not really supposed to link up with people that you don't know in real life, but no one has told on me yet. So I also ask for referrals from anybody and everybody. Implementers, I'll go to Erin Bays. If I go to a volunteer and say, can you do an assignment? And they say no, I'll say, well, do you have a friend who can do an assignment in the same field? If you go to the farmer's market and you buy groceries, or you use an accountant to do your taxes, those people are fair game to me. So I'm sort of always in recruitment mode, thinking about, who I can coerce to try something new. Also, I like to, once in a while, I do something that I call volunteer first placement, which I approach with a big degree of caution. But if I find someone that I know is going to be a really good volunteer, they've got a perfect background, but I don't necessarily have a scope of work for them at the moment, I'll just send their CV out to the country programs and say, is there anything in the pipeline? Is there anything that you would like this person for? Many times they'll come back and say, oh yeah, we actually have this at the school, and that person would be perfect. Another thing that I will do is, for example, I just did this for Uganda because I need a couple more placements before the end of the year. I just went out to my country director and I said, if you could have anyone to fill these scopes of work, who would it be? And he gave me a list of names, and I went out to a few of them, and a couple of them accepted. So it's funny, you know, you would think they might tell me who to send over more often, but usually they'll wait for me to send someone. So just asking the field staff their opinion. University connections, you know, we have strong connections to Purdue. CRS maintains a lot of university connections, so those channels are good. One of my favorite things to do is a Google Power Hour, which is I will book a conference room and I will tell myself that for 1 hour for this very hard to fill scope of work, I'm going to Google skill sets, university programs, and I'm just going to pick up the phone. And if no one answers, I'm going to leave a message, and then I'm going to do a follow-up email. So I found very hard people that way. I found a flavor technologist that way. I found a citrus person that way. I called up fruit farms. When people said no, I said, do you know anyone? So just telling yourself that for that hour, you're not going to allow yourself to be distracted. You know, putting out enough phone calls and emails will get you far. And then I think also something that's really hard for us to do is just to cultivate those new relationships that take a long time. You know, if you go out and you do a visit somewhere, you know, to get that sign-in sheet and then to write that person to say, what did you think? Do you want to have a call to talk more about the program? That's a harder, you know, cultivating those new relationships is harder, but I think it can be fruitful in the end, or linking somebody up who's intrigued but not sure to a past volunteer who will sell them on the program. So yeah.
Great, thank you so much. I wanted to ask one quick follow-up question before we move on to Elizabeth. You mentioned a couple of different times your interaction with the in-country staff, and I was wondering if you could expand on that a little bit more. How do you engage them in general when you have a volunteer that you're thinking about sending out? And you know, are there any specific best practices around that, or what works best for you?
So typically when I've found someone, I usually present them to my field staff first before I contact them. If I've come across their CV before I have a phone call, and I'll send it out and say, does this person look okay? And if they say yes, then I'll call the person up and try to interview them, and then try to align things. If I have interest first, maybe I'll interview the notes to the field staff on the person and their CV. I don't have a regular set meeting with my field staff. I have all different relationships. One of them, I think we say every morning just a few notes about candidates. Other ones, you know, just email. But yeah, I mean, it seems to work well. We meet annually in East Africa, so that really helps a lot, just to have that confidence and that face time with them. But I don't know if that answers your question.
Yeah, I think it does. Thank you. So we'll hold other questions for the end if you have any, but Elizabeth?
Sure. So from our perspective, so we've had, as Carla mentioned in the presentation, we've had the VIP program for close to 20 years now. And while we've had that experience with volunteers, our volume has never been very high. So we are now looking at, hopefully, that volume will increase. And so we are actually in a very active position where we're really thinking through some of our volunteer processes and how we're going to best manage those as the volume increases. So we're kind of in a little bit of a different situation now. So what we're thinking through this, one of the first things that we've kind of come up with in thinking through some best practices is that recruitment really has to be built into the annual work planning process, and really looking at, and this we really feel like results in some scopes of work that are much more tightly aligned with the objectives of the program. So it should be part of that process. It should be, you know, a major part of the discussion that happens at the level when you're in the field working on the work plan with the team, and looking at the calendar and when exactly these assignments need to take place, so that you can really kind of develop the pipeline. That also that allows for the recruiters and the folks that are looking for the volunteers back at home really enough lead time to find the right person. And as we all know, like finding the right person is like the key to the success of the assignment. So, and another tip sort of with this is then, I mean, this is actually sort of a side note, but have a backup volunteer is kind of a best practice that we've always found when we're looking for people for the VIP program or for other ones. We always try to have a backup so that we're not stuck if something happens at the last minute and that person has to bail for a health reason or a family reason or some outside situation. We're looking at sort of recruitment in a couple of different ways. So we're looking at very active recruitment, which is how we've engaged with the VIP program in the past. And that's sort of specifically posting scopes of work that are very specific to the assignment that we need, and then sort of waiting for an applicant to apply. We call that post and pray. So we've been doing that mostly for VIP because, as I mentioned, we've had a low volume. So there isn't really much of a reason to do a lot more of the passive recruiting or sourcing that kind of goes in the background. The negatives on this side obviously are you don't know if you're going to find the right person in time. But the positive is it requires less manpower, you know, especially if you're like at a lower volume. On the passive recruitment side, that's where we're really looking at changing some of our procedures and our processes. We are using our own volunteer database, which is migrating into the iCIMS product, which we're using for broader recruitment for staff, long-term staff, as well as consultants. And that will be able to differentiate between volunteer assignment jobs and consulting jobs, as well as, you know, long-term and short-term. And we're recognizing that the same skill set is really existing in both populations of people, and that population can be fluid. Someone could be a consultant one day and a volunteer the next. So we're kind of moving from that sort of passive space to the active space. We're actually looking at 3 stages of sort of posting ads. So once we know that we have a number of volunteer assignments coming up, we will be posting an ad that's very general in nature, just to sort of cast the wide net and to find people that may be potential volunteers once it comes time to narrow that scope. And then kind of in the middle ground, we would have another job posting that would maybe present, that would be more specific to a skill set, so specific TVET volunteers versus the wider net. And then, of course, when the work plan comes around and you're a couple months out, you would post a very specific one so that you can really narrow it down if you haven't found someone through casting a wide net. So another way that we're looking to is to link not only to our own internal database, but to link our database to the DevX database. There's a lot of obviously excellent skill sets there. So this whole system requires a lot more manpower, and so that's where we're trying to, and it also sort of allows you to have, but on the positive side, it allows you to have a pipeline so you know exactly kind of like what's coming up, like what you need to be doing. So it's much more strategic and much more, but again, much more manpower is required to do that. One other sort of best practice that we use that is sort of supports both of this sort of active to passive recruitment is really volunteer profiling, and we're sort of looking at 5 different profiles, and several of them were touched on in Carla's presentation. Students obviously is one population, and sort of looking at events and listservs and things that we can access to different types of people. The second one is sort of current employees. So that would be that would either be, you know, companies that are looking to provide opportunities to their staff to go off and do something as like a sabbatical or some kind of CSR type of thing, or it could be like working with, like how we work with John Deere and how they're looking at providing volunteer opportunities for their staff. Retirees obviously are a big one. People who have a vast amount of experience but have retired and they're just, you know, they can't sit still, they want to get out, they want to go do stuff. So those are definitely a huge population for that we like to access. And then the fourth one is sort of people that are kind of in between jobs, and people that are kind of looking to diversify their resume, maybe with different experiences in different countries. They may be trying to do some different things while they're looking for something else. And the final one is sort of the diaspora community or local volunteers that we've utilized quite a bit in the past. looking at a lot of the populations that have the diaspora community in the United States, oftentimes they really want to go back, especially in instances of disaster and post-conflict. A lot of folks really want to go back and try to help rebuild their country. And we've seen that a lot, I believe, in Liberia, I believe we've seen that there's been a decent number of diaspora folks from Liberia that are heading back out. That's sort of it. I mean, I think we can talk more about some of the challenges we faced. I think that's like the second part of the presentation.
Sure.
Okay.
Absolutely.
All right. That's it.
One quick point of clarification. You mentioned ISIN, a system that you guys are using.
ISIN.
What is that?
Yeah, it's like a human resource recruitment database.
Okay.
Yeah, it's ICIMS.
ICIMS.
Yeah.
And that's just a software platform that you guys have adopted. Okay.
Writing that down too.
Well, I mean, is it interesting? Is it working well for you guys?
Yeah, I mean, we've just sort of recently adopted it within the last few months.
Okay.
For our overall. We actually had another system for staffing and recruiting, and we migrated everything over. So, I mean, yeah, it seems to be working well. I think the recruiters in our organization really like it a lot.
If you could bullet out like 3 reasons that you chose that system, why did you choose that one?
So it does a word search of like PDF documents. So if you can upload, or so you can attach it to your apply here. So it'll just seamlessly, if people apply, their resumes will go straight into the system.
Okay.
Also, so it does a full word search. So if you do the Boolean search, it'll search all the PDF documents for whatever words you're looking for. You can search, and it's just sort of very user friendly. I mean, it's very easy to find people and find job. Like, you have to post the job in there, so like you develop the scope of work, posted as a job. The job can be either posted on your website, or it can be like not like invisible. Like, it doesn't have to be posted. So you can have like an invisible one, and if you're sort of just trying to collect names and resumes, you can kind of make an invisible posting and not have it. Well, it's like you're collecting something. So like, let's say I go to an event where I'm collecting resumes, like a job fair or something, then I can take all those back and pop those in the system myself. So those are some reasons that it seems really user-friendly.
Okay.
So
thank you.
I'm not paid by ISIN.
I feel like sometimes the system side of things is very, very important and isn't talked about as much. So
right. Yeah.
Yeah, okay. So again, I'm Megan Moyerman. I'm with TechnoServe, and I manage our volunteer consultant program that we've had for 20 years come this year. Yeah, so we've been around for quite a while. If you're not familiar with TechnoServe, we are not technology. We don't do technology. It's misleading. Anyway, we use business solutions to help people in developing countries. So we work with enterprising people, build farms and businesses and industries that are competitive. The volunteer consultant program, our typical candidates are management consultants and people that work in the finance industry, so people with business backgrounds. That's not the only ones that we work with, but that's our biggest type of profile. And we do, obviously, our projects tend to revolve around people with that skill set. So we have anywhere from 250 to 300 applications a year, and probably 1 in 3 we do end up using in some way. Might be a little lower than that sometimes. We tend to get applicants with about 2 to 5 years of work experience. We actually do analysis at the end of the year on all of our candidates, and we create a report on that so we can see trends. We do the same thing. We actually get them exit emails or exit surveys as well, and we do analysis on that. Call that a feedback report, so you can see how successful we are. So those are some really helpful tips. So our candidates, 2 to 5 years of work experience, they tend to come in between grad school as well, or on their way to grad school. Lots of times management consultant firms kick them out after 2 years and make them go to grad school or find another job, or they're just looking for other types of work. So they'll come through us. And we have, for recruitment purposes, we have partnerships with very strong management consultant firms That would be, for instance, McKinsey, Bain, and BCG. We work with their social impact programs, or sometimes they call them secondment programs, internship programs. Those are our second largest source of talent, I think. Our first largest source of talent are actually our alumni. So in a given year, we'll have anywhere from 75 to 100 volunteer consultants on the ground on a rolling basis, and they'll do two months to a year. And it's really important to make sure that they have a positive experience and they feel like they're impacting their project, as well as that they do a good job. But the reason why is we get 70 to 80% of our candidates from referrals. Huge and very important. It really helps relieve the stress on the team, myself and my colleague who run the program for recruitment purposes. It's helpful. We also recruit, we post on the firms that I mentioned, career boards too, and for their alumni. We also have partnerships with some of the really strong business schools as well. So we work with Kellogg and Wharton, and we do international as well, so INSEAD and some other IESE, I think that's it. So we work with them, and they also tend to have social impact programs. So we'll try to hook up with their groups, usually through our alumni. They connect us with them. And then we also post on their career sites. Let's see what else. We have a Facebook page, so we try to work through that. We try to get all of our volunteers to like it so they can follow it, and that helps with referrals in the future. We're working on getting a LinkedIn page, which I hear is really helpful, and we're going to set that up for our alumni so that they can easily connect back to us. I've even used my own LinkedIn page as advertising for the program. So see what else am I missing here. And we have, again, it's a lot of it is based on word of mouth. So we have quarterly newsletters that we send to alumni, and within those newsletters we put scopes of work, so JDs for the projects that we're advertising for, just to draw in some interest, get some referrals if they want to do a second role. We have a lot who want to do second roles, probably 30% of them or more than two roles. What else? We are working on adding profiles of volunteer consultants on our website, and that helps to show comfort level with people coming from similar backgrounds. It shows an interest of where they might be now as alumni. So where working with TechnoServe brought them. And we're also going to be putting something that we call Stories from the Field on there, which I think will be really helpful. Also relieve questions that you might get during the application process. And we're working on something else, potentially changing our program's name as well, but we can talk about that in the challenge part. Okay. So I think that's mostly it for now.
Great.
Thank you.
Well, I'll do one quick follow-up. You said that alumni are your greatest source. You mentioned a couple ways that you are currently keeping in touch with them and going to keep in touch with them more. The newsletter, you're starting a LinkedIn group. Are there any other kind of best practices you have for keeping in touch with them, those alumni, and building them into a community?
Yes, we do. And we certainly could make it even stronger. But yeah, we have a little more than 1,000 volunteers, so it is, or in the past, alumni. It can be challenging. They're all over the place, but they do tend to congregate into certain cities. So, for instance, we have what we call alumni chapter: San Francisco, London, Boston, New York, Chicago, DC. And what we try to do is find a chapter leader that's an alumni that wants to take on the task of working with us to organize anywhere from 2 to 3 times a year events. I am able to visit some of those events as well, and sometimes able to help cover some of the costs.
Okay.
I think that working with the chapter leaders is helpful because I can't do it all myself.
How important do you think is that sometimes funding for keeping the chapters going?
I think it's very important. When you get face-to-face with them and they hear about, we can send, our staffers that have been in the field to go talk to them. It's really important for that face-to-face value. It reminds them why they're there. it keeps them connected to TechnoServe as a whole, because eventually we could use them as donors down the line for our programs. They connect us to corporations. Very important for many reasons.
Great, thank you. And last but definitely not least, Andy.
So I'm with Partners of the Americas. I'm going to be a little repetitive. I'll try not to be extra so, but a lot of parallels with Maria, since we both work with farmer to farmer. So Partners has been around for quite a while. We have a pretty wide network. We've been working on farmer to farmer for a long time as well. So that's our existing network, and past volunteers is our primary pool for new volunteers. We have an internal database where resumes are tagged with different skills to make searching easier. And then we also have a newsletter that goes out to our chapter network. That's another way to reach different people. And then we have social media, blog posts, Twitter, LinkedIn, same stuff to kind of advertise certain, either a specific position or kind of a general area where we know we're going to be soliciting resumes. So for some assignments that are less specialized, that kind of cross over value chains, there are a lot more potential candidates, business planning, marketing, that type of thing. So for those, we have a lot to choose from, and so we can be a little bit more picky on experience maybe in a certain sector, but also focusing on those people skills and that type of thing, the flexibility of the person in a certain context. Someone who feels comfortable going to Guatemala is not necessarily comfortable going to Haiti, for example. So keeping that in mind. And yeah, so for assignments that are more specialized, like a couple of years ago, we were recruiting for a mead making assignment for Jamaica. There weren't a ton of, we didn't have a lot of those in our network. That required a lot of Googling and reaching out to, like, trying to get referrals, looking up businesses and finding, you know, doing all that stuff, trying to be creative, searching trade groups and publications, like reading magazines and then finding who the author was and, you know, reaching out to that person. And then same with trying to, whatever existing relationships we have with universities or extension services or things like that, those people often have some good ideas. Let's see. So this does mean doing, for those types of assignments, it does mean doing more cold calls and cold emails. So the reach out, there would be a lot more than if it was an assignment that we're kind of used to, or an area that we're kind of used to. But it's also a fun way to meet really new and different people on the phone or in person if you're lucky enough to have someone nearby. We really encourage that. Partners, calls or Skype or things like that, especially for when you're reaching out. I always try to imagine if it were me and some organization I never heard of was calling me to go to a foreign land to work for free. I would maybe be a little hesitant, but if someone called and spoke to me and sent me some success stories and that type of stuff, I would feel a lot better. So so we actually generally recruit 3 to 5 potential candidates for an assignment. So we have a backup to our backup. And so because sometimes it'll depend on scheduling if there's some flexibility, but we'll send those to the field staff who will then present them. Either they'll meet in country with the host or talk to them on the phone and kind of say, these are the highlights of this person. We think, you know, in this person, do you feel like that's a good fit? We do the security checks. We get references, which is helpful. We talk to other, Maria emails with our team, and we email with Sadie from Land Lakes and things like that, and with Angela about people who volunteered in the past. Sorry if I forgot someone. And so, like I said, for first-time volunteers, we do the best we can, or first-time reach-outs or things like that. We try to speak to them in person or on the phone. For repeat ones, repeat volunteers who've worked with other implementers or who have extensive international volunteering experience, like a Peace Corps type person, we might not necessarily do that. What'll often happen with those people is they have completely different questions. Their questions are a lot more technical. They're a lot more about the intricacies of the scope of work. And so making sure that the people, those doing our recruitment, have sufficient information to be able to answer those questions, or connecting them directly to the field staff to do For most of our assignments, the finalists for the assignment will do a Skype or phone call with the field staff before their travel is finalized. Oh, also putting them in touch, putting volunteers in touch with the field staff is also helpful for getting the ball rolling with planning. A lot of assignments, there's a perfect window for volunteers to come because the animals need to be in heat or something. And so making back scheduling so that everything is ready. Like one volunteer, he made a design for an enclosure for goats in Guatemala and then sent that, and then they built it from local materials, and then they sent the photos back. And so for some assignments, there's a lot of preparation, but that ensures that in-country things go a lot more smoothly and that we can have the biggest impact. I'm going to go ahead and say a couple of challenges just because I'm on a roll. So besides not finding someone with a matching skill set, which is obviously a challenge for certain assignments or like availability, sometimes, depending on the size or scope of work, potential candidates might want to get paid. We are upfront with that, but sometimes someone will throw a wrench in the conversation, and you get kind of taken aback because we've invested time in that person. So that doesn't happen often, but it happens every now and then. Obviously, we talk nice and talk about volunteering and citizen diplomacy and farmer to farmer. And then another challenge that sometimes is if a scope of work is too big or too complex, maybe it should be divided into a team assignment if it's not realistic for one individual to accomplish all the deliverables in that amount of time. Because when people come back to the U.S., they have jobs and crops and whatever, and so we need to make sure that things can be realistically accomplished in that time. So that'll happen sometimes too, where we'll maybe modify it into a team assignment. And yeah, just one, look for kind people, be kind, and show gratitude for the service because people are giving their time and leaving their family and their jobs. Maybe taking the only 2 weeks of vacation they have for the whole year. So just being really mindful of that. So that is all.
Thank you. Now I'm watching the clock, and I realize that we don't have a ton of time. So I think what I'd like to do is kind of work our way back and ask each of you to mention maybe your top challenge and how you address it, and then we're going to open it up for questions. And if you didn't have something necessarily identified, we can just go to questions. Also. Yeah.
Okay, so I guess that's me. Okay. So, I think the top challenge for us is that there's just increasingly more competition for the types of talent that we're looking for. So our program a while back was probably one of the few who was looking for specifically that type of talent, which would be the people with business backgrounds, and then send them to international social impact projects. And that is not the case anymore. And so even within some of our firms that we're sourcing talent from that we've been partners with for a long time, they're now actually doing a version of what we do internally, so they don't lose their talent. So I think for us that a big challenge is how do we stay competitive? How do we stay very interesting to them so that they don't find another organization to work? And we're working on rebranding with how we're also changing our name to possibly fellowship. Okay.
So the VIP name is taken, and that's a good branding.
Yeah, I know. I like that one.
I would say probably our top challenge has been sort of just the timing of the assignments, matching that with the availability of the right person that you find. Oftentimes, these are professionals, and so they may only have a very short window that they're available, but then the program needs them at this other time, and so matching that up is always a challenge. And likewise, not every volunteer you find that, I think someone already kind of mentioned this, that like not everyone you find they may have the right skill set, but then you get them on the phone and they just like can't talk to people, you know what I mean? Or they're just like not good, like they would not be good interacting with people. And so, I think you need to, balance that kind of stuff, so you can't kind of go into it like a last-minute assignment, like let's get this position filled and get them out the door in 2 weeks. Like, don't even try that. I think that's kind of one of the things that we try to at least look at, a couple months lead time with finding the assignment and filling it. So, it's pretty painful when you find like the perfect person and then the timing doesn't match up. So you kind of have to go with your plan B or plan C. So, yeah.
So currently, I'm finding that CRS's biggest problem recruiting is just the active versus passive recruiting thing that you mentioned, because our system currently has no way to apply for any given position, which might sound crazy to people who have that ability, but trying to recruit for 120 volunteers a year, where for each one I have to reach out unless someone thinks to contact me. And I don't have a way to click on a job and see a list of people who are interested in it. Makes things really difficult. But I would say one other challenge that might be more applicable to everyone is what to tell people who have gone overseas and done a volunteer assignment and didn't do so well, and come back and want another one. What to tell them, how much information to give them, because they can be really persistent. And the volunteer communities are very small, so that's something I've been trying to figure out.
Or some might do poorly, not as well in one country and do really well in another, which can also be tricky to suss out who are you going to take a chance on again.
Right.
Do any other panel members want to comment on that, or anyone in the room really?
I mean, I think it really depends on what the issue was with that person. Like you have to really kind of get into the details of why the field team felt like they weren't successful.
Usually people skills.
Yeah.
But maybe they do okay with culture, but in another culture they're too abrasive. So I just don't know how friends you be with them.
There's no scope of work.
Well, the problem is that it's always the business volunteers, and then they come and they say, well, I see you've got 6 business planning assignments open, and then I'm kind of like, I really do. So,
Megan, this seems like something you deal with.
Yeah. I mean, it's not horribly often, but yes, you're right. It is lots of times their personnel issues. Yeah, I just try to think of how we deal with it. I mean, we try to say up front that we try to tell everyone that, hey, you're applying to a program, this is a competitive program, and if you get it, great, but we're not going to tell you you can get it. And the same thing in a nicer way is how I say, I usually do a midpoint check, and then in that midpoint check, if they're doing well, we could say if you're interested in a second role, so you may find your own candidates quicker that way too, if for second roles. But the ones that don't want it, I think just letting everyone know before they even finish their first one that, there's nothing that says that they're going to definitely get a second role. It all just depends. I mean, I tell them straight up, like, it depends on performance. So,
right. But if they haven't performed well, will you tell them?
I do not tell them. They usually have a good sense as to whether they did or not. Not from me, and we don't encourage our managers to say anything to them either, because they usually have some idea. But I have had some that just keep asking and talking about it, and I just say, it sounds like you think that your skill set's the right fit for this, but they're actually looking for slightly different. So, it's tricky. I agree.
So, yeah, I have told a volunteer that we have targets for new volunteers.
Yeah, that's actually
also
a good one.
For a little bit.
Yeah.
But then you could consider them in the future. But
I've done that.
Yeah, that's a good one.
Then I get mad.
Just a quick question. As each of you were talking, I couldn't help but wonder about the comparison between recruiting volunteers and recruiting career consultants.
Yeah.
Either best practices or most significant challenges and problems. And then Andy touched on it in terms of people wanting to get paid. I mean, when you actually give somebody a consulting agreement, and money is changing hands, not just per diem and expenses, you sort of have the ability to have to exert some control over that person, and they're signing and agreeing to abiding by a whole range of conditions and many of AID rules and regulations as well. And any reflections on that, comparisons with paid consultants versus recruiting volunteers?
We really run ours through a very similar process. I mean, the only difference is that there's no payment. I mean, like, they still have to sign all the same paperwork about releases and health checks and, you know, blah, blah, all that stuff, you know, before they go. I mean, we run them through the same system. They apply through the same system. You know, I mean, it's a parallel process. So, I mean, and like I said before, oftentimes, you know, you may have somebody who does 5 consulting assignments for you, and then, you know, they feel like, oh, I want to do a volunteer assignment. You know, I wouldn't get an opportunity to go to that country otherwise or something, you know.
For me, it wouldn't be necessarily a difference in the recruitment, but in the management of the person. With consultants, it's a lot more black and white. With volunteers, the volunteers are kind of like, I think of it as they're kind of a client, or not, but a little bit different than a consultant. And so maybe at least I feel like, not just me, but the rest of my team, we probably would coddle a volunteer more than a paid consultant.
Interesting. Thanks.
One question of TechnoServe. I think you said that most of your volunteer assignments are 2 months to a year.
Yes, we actually have one for 18 months, but that's a fellowship with someone.
And what stipend do they get? What level of
Great question.
funding?
Our teams tend to offer, but it's not exclusive, but flights to and from, housing, per diem, which is usually like 50% of what the State Department would offer for those locations. And oftentimes they'll cover visa, vaccinations, a lot of onboarding expenses. But they're not paid, so it's just basically reimbursing for travel expenses.
And a question from global cities. Of the 5 categories of volunteers or pools that you draw from, what's the experience? Which give the best results?
Well, I think it really...
differences there?
Well, sure. I mean, obviously, students are not quite as knowledgeable or as experienced. So it really, I think, you have to really think hard about the scope of work for students. The other 4 that I mentioned are generally, you know, relatively senior in their skill set. So, I mean, I would see students as kind of the outlier. I mean, we pretty much exclusively, with the exception of students, work with, you know, mid-level to senior level professionals. So it's going to be people who know the job at hand, who know the job, who know how to do what it is to do. And with students, like I said, I think, you know, we've done these capstone. A lot of the times those are real kind of analysis, research kind of projects that they're kind of more used to doing anyway through their graduate program. And oftentimes they actually get advice and guidance from their advisors in their university. So that also helps kind of to help guide them and make sure that they're meeting our needs and fulfilling the scope of work.
I had another question for you. You mentioned that you recruit for retirees and people with like in between jobs. Can you talk and touch on what kind of networks do you use to reach out to those kind of people?
So I know I had these listed in in another set of notes, but I didn't write down here, so I can't remember off the top of my head. But, you know, I think a lot of it's the same that we've heard, you know, like LinkedIn, like ex-staff, ex-consultants who are now, you know, maybe they don't really consult anymore, but they occasionally want to go out and do things. So it's also first level kind of reaching out to our existing network of people that we know. You know, in between jobs, a lot of times that is, you know, folks that we've worked with on different projects that are, that again, like are in our existing network. I know. I was talking to my recruiter about this. She gave me a few of these things. I'd like to get back to you more on that. Okay. But we do have some specific like events and networks and things that we can tap into. I know that for sure. So
I think Daniel.
I just had a question about the role of the client and how you know the different clients, whether it's USAID or DFID or foundations of the private sector, influences the approach to recruiting.
Repeat that one more time. I'm sorry.
My question was around the client, like how the different approaches you take, whether your client is USAID, a private sector company, and a foundation. How does that change your approach to recruitment of volunteers?
The only thing I could say to that, because we actually our volunteers work directly with our full-time staff, Technoserve funds. We just get a lot of funding from USAID and other organizations. For instance, there might be ones that want to see the volunteers and help pick the volunteers, so that can be a little challenging, so knowing exactly what they want. There are ones that want to see a specific number of them so they can choose between them. That can also be very challenging if the team doesn't want to show them one really good one that they know they want and then two B-type candidates. Then you have to, they just suck up all the A-type candidates for that one position, and then they can possibly lose them because they're not going to use all three of them. So it can be challenging, but those are the only two that I see. The rest of you.
The only thing that sort of comes to mind is if sometimes corporate partners may have a person in mind they want, and then they say, we want you to use this person. And whether or not you think that's the right person for the job, it doesn't necessarily matter. But when it's, when it's been, a USAID-funded program, it's usually, pretty hands-off. We tend to do mostly cooperative agreements, so we're able to, we just have to get the assignment done, one way or another, and we are able to have our discretion in selecting the right candidate.
So we're already a few minutes over. Can we take a couple more questions?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, great. There were a couple more hands. Leah, and then Alex, you had a question?
I did.
Okay, so.
So my question is, if you've identified a volunteer and you're working with them a little bit further down the road, closer to when the assignment's going to be fielded, and you find out something about the volunteer that doesn't necessarily preclude the volunteer from going on that assignment, but might heighten the risk of the assignment, what do you do in those type of circumstances? Or maybe that hasn't happened.
That has happened. There's one specific example, which Gary knows about. I got down the road with this volunteer and did not think that it was definitely high risk. My gut was telling me, don't send this person. But the local partner and host said, we really want this person. So I sent him, and it was a disaster. And that is the warning I give to my team members, and when we bring in someone new, I tell them the more gory details of the story. I mean, being dramatic, but and my big thing is to follow. I trust my instinct, and I feel like once you've been doing the work for a little while, you can have a good sense of people. And so it has been where, so my lesson from that was to listen to that feeling, and even if the ticket is already booked, or even if the dates are finalized, if I or one of my team members gets a bad feeling, we'll probably not send that person.
So it sounds like with this, that was specific to potentially the personality of that person and actually conducting the work, which I know can be challenging also, but in kind of a different circumstance where that might be something that's out of that volunteer's control, or some circumstance might change. That in the country, or potentially something you find out about that volunteer, maybe a health related something that probably would be fine for them to go on vacation, but because they're going under your organization within this fielding, volunteer context, it elevates the risk a little bit more. So I'm curious if anyone's had any challenges with this, and kind of what are the steps that you address that?
I haven't had this experience with necessarily volunteer, but just with other staff people. If there's some medical condition or something and they think it might be okay, I try to reach out and find, if I haven't been to that country specifically or know the context, I really try to make sure they understand what they're getting themselves into. Like, you will not have access to a bathroom or clean water or, you know, whatever it is, and make sure that they're aware of those. And then, I mean, at the end of the day, I mean, I think the person has to make, if it's kind of in that gray area, like the person has to make the decision for themselves. But if you want to try to persuade them maybe not to do it, I think you can probably find ways by having them talk to a few other people on the ground.
Mentors,
yeah,
mentors.
yeah.
I mean, if it's medical related, like they have to do the same fitness for travel form that get it signed by a doctor that our consultants would, and so one would hope a doctor would recommend they not go to such a place if there was those kinds of risks. Although a recruiter, when she worked at another organization, said they ended up feeling a volunteer who had this form signed, and he ended up being so obese he could not do the assignment and had to be sent back. And so even having that form signed doesn't always guarantee that they're actually physically able to do the job.
Yeah, I agree. We have our volunteer consultants when they're going through the contracting process for us. We do have them sign several forms, and you know, one of them is the informed consent. So we also connect them to International SOS, which we give to all our volunteers, and we require them to do a security and medical call with them so they can understand the situation on the ground there, and they can make their own decision, but they have to sign this form so we're not liable. It's also a scary form.
Get legally
so,
involved.
yeah, exactly.
Get legally involved.
But it's a scary form, so you know, if they don't want to do it, they don't sign it, they don't do it.
And Alex, do you have a question?
Yeah, I've got a question for Megan regarding the challenge you mentioned of competing with others, maybe even others in this room. Where do you find the loyalties of your volunteers lie? Is it with TechnoServe, with VEGA, with the driving mission, the field partner, and do you manipulate the optics on that?
Oh, I'll tell you. So.
Play a role in defining that for them.
I will say that there are some that are very loyal to TechnoServe's mission in general, and many of your organizations also have similar missions. So I think they're in general interested in that, a mission similar to that. On top of that, I will say it's really helpful because of the type of talent and where they're coming from. They like names, big names, so it's really helpful when we're advertising to sort of say who we're partnering with, who our donors are, like saying USAID or Gates Foundation, and saying that this project that they will be working on could potentially be something for that organization or foundation. That's really helpful for us. I've noticed this more and more. And it is something we're actually thinking about putting on our website if we can get approval from organizations too.
I want to check in on the call and make sure that no one who has joined, or is there anyone on the call who has a question? Okay, any more questions in the room? Great. Well, we've already gone 10 minutes over, so I think we'll wrap it up there, though. Thank you so much to each of you for coming in and sharing. Online on Farmer to Farmer and VEGA, and so if you want to share this, we'll make that available to you.
Yeah, just to echo, thanks again for the panel members for preparing and answering the questions. You guys did a great job. Don't run if you don't have to. We have plenty of cookies, juice, networking time if you want to use it, so feel free to stick around. Thanks again.
Go
ahead. Thank you.
All right. Anxiously waiting news.
Yeah. We got two of them were.
Yeah. Thank you.
Probably right tomorrow, right before that. Usually that's how it works. Yeah.
I almost be tomorrow morning.
Yeah.
Sharing if I share your contact.